Hi there. Today we will analyze farming in Rasta in detail and on our fingers. We will reveal the topic of new berries and teas, look at the most efficient farm in the game, learn how to cross genes coolly, get perfect sprouts, find out how to set a horse, but most importantly, we will figure out what all this is for. To create this video, I studied quite a lot of material, including from English-speaking guys. I'll tell you more about the sources at the end of the video, but for now let's get started. There will really be a lot of information, so charge yourself with tea, vetoes like and let's go in order. Oh, yes, the description contains all the time codes for the video. I advise you to watch the whole video first, and then just go back to the time codes that interest you. The first thing we need to figure out is what farms are for in general. Here the answer will depend on which farms we are talking about. This farm here, it does not require almost any investments and special efforts, while it allows you not to need fabric, berries and food. Knowledge about farming allows you to get buffs when farming, when shooting, when loot, and anything at all. Such a farm can be built in any database, and it will not require almost any time costs. But this is also a farm, and it allows you not to need anything at all. This cube allocates about 100,000 scraps daily. And here it is worth talking about such a thing as a universal currency. If you think about this hypothesis in more detail, get into the situation more seriously, then you can really buy anything for a scrub. When using the City of Bandits, the farm on the Waitress allows you to have a huge amount of resources, weapons, armor and anything else without any special threats and without requiring any skills in PvP. With one such farm, you can buy 200 arrows per day, or 200 top sets of MBK armor, you can buy almost 200,000 gunpowder or buy a new minicopter every 10 minutes. I will tell you how to build such a farm, how to monitor it and what you can save on a little later, but for now you need to get acquainted with the theory in detail. And the first paragraph for today is the basics of farming. To begin with, let's get acquainted with our plants. At the moment, you can grow potatoes in the game. It is the most unpretentious and will survive where no other plant will survive. We also have 6 different berry bushes, we will talk about them separately at the end, but the most whimsical to the conditions is a cannabis bush, corn and pumpkin. In the process of growth, each seed goes through 8 stages. The speed of passing the stage depends on the conditions of the plant, as well as on its genetics. What conditions are needed? Light, water, soil and temperature. All of them are indicated on each plant in the table of conditions. There is also another scale called overall. The protocol suggested calling her happiness. Well, I actually don't mind. The overall of the plant is in fact a duplicate of the worst of the conditions of its maintenance. For example, if all the parameters of a plant are 100, and the water has dropped to 10, then happiness will stay at 10, and the plant will begin to die. You can track the health of the plant on a special scale. If it goes down, it's rubbish. However, on a freshly planted plant, health will be significantly lower than 100. It will increase over time. Then we have the age of our plant in minutes. We can use it to track how long it took the plant to get to one or another stage of growth. The current stage is indicated slightly below. A percentage is indicated next to it, indicating how soon this stage will come to an end and a new one will begin. Now let's call all the same these same stages of growth. I don't see any point in translating them, as this may lead you astray. There is no Russian version in the game yet, and in the future it may differ from mine. So, the stages. Sid is a very short stage. Sidlin is, in fact, its continuation. Lasts about 10 minutes. Saplin, at this stage, cannabis can already be harvested and cloned. It also lasts about 10 minutes, depending on the specific plant, as well as the conditions. Crossbred is the most important stage of all. It opens the door to the world of genetics, but we will enter it a little later. The crossing does not last very long, just a couple of minutes. Then we have 3 more separate stages at which the fruits can already be harvested: mochuya, shootin and rip. If during all this time the fruits are not harvested, then the plant will go into the dying stage and begin to die. If we do not want our plant to die prematurely, it is worth worrying about the growing conditions. Let me remind you that plants need temperature, soil, water and light. We can't regulate the temperature in the game yet, even despite the electric heating, it doesn't work for plants. So it's just worth considering that it's best to build a farm in a forest biome. Winter and the desert will not suit us, the efficiency of the farm there will be much lower. The soil is the very first thing that needs to be dealt with. You can plant plants just in the ground, but you can't cook porridge without beds. The beds themselves are small and large. We are not interested in small ones, but large ones can be obtained by crafting, or buy in the bandits' camp for 30 scrap, which, by the way, is very profitable. The game also has a fertilizer option. It makes sense to use it only in small home farms, because it is very difficult and time-consuming to extract fertilizers on an industrial scale after all the nerves. The most effective way for home farms is to look for horses, take them home and feed them constantly. But I believe that there is no point in doing this for the sake of a small increase in the growth rate of plants. So it will be much easier to put a few composters and just throw in as many pickles as possible, bought in the City of Bandits. By the way, these pickles are ideal for feeding horses, because they cost pennies, and horses eat them with great pleasure. Okay, we got the soil. Now you need to wet it. Only fresh water is suitable for this. If you have only a couple of beds at home, then you can water them manually. Canisters are ideal for this. A maximum of 1 canister can be watered 8 beds at once, 4 on one floor and 4 on the other. To do this, you need to stand on the lower floor, in the middle, between the beds. However, each plant consumes water during growth, so having a lot of plants, it will be much easier to bring water to them with a hose. The hose system is very similar to the electricity system, the guide for which I have already done. The only exception is that the water cannot flow up by itself. But more on that a little later. The first stage in the irrigation system will be getting the water itself. Water collectors on an industrial scale are completely inefficient, so you will have to use a pump. It is put directly into the water, connected to the network, and the hose is removed further. If the water in the hose is salty, it needs to be desalinated. A large electric desalination plant copes with this task perfectly. There is a loss of water there, it also consumes electricity, but nevertheless. Then we have tees, connectors and a bunch of other things, but all this, as for me, is not necessary at all. We just put this pump here, it's called a circulation pump. It allows you to let water up the pipe, as well as block it. If we need to raise the water up, we will have to connect electricity to the pump. If not, we just leave it like that. Well, we lead everything directly to the sprinklers. We put sprinklers 1 by 1 on 4 beds, exactly in the middle. About the same way we watered the beds by hand, only this time for only 1 floor. You can connect them one to another in series, from 1 pump to 6 pieces. Pumps still have problems with work, they have to be constantly turned on and off. And in order to bypass this tank, a fairly simple automatic watering system was invented. Its scheme is really very simple. We supply electricity to the lever, divide it twice with a splitter. We let one into the splitter, the other 2 into the blockers. Under the blockers we hang another splitter and 2 timers. We connect everything to each other, closing the circuit. On the left timer, we set the field operation time, for example, 5 seconds. On the right we set the time of the CD field, for example 10 seconds. Now we bring the branch of the central branch to the pump and check the operation of the system. Everything works. Now you can set the time more and fill the beds once manually, so as not to wait. By the way, you will have to add water in the garden almost every day. The bed has filled up, turned black, so everything is okay, it's time to do lighting. We hang a lamp exactly in the middle of the bed, connect it and that's it. The problem of light is closed on this. The lamps work on 2 floors at once, so they can be installed through the floor. It will not cause any damage to plants, but it will significantly reduce costs. Okay, our cannabis will live, which means it's time to make offspring out of it. Each plant has 6 genes. They can be good and bad. Good genes include J. Each such gene increases the growth rate. Y allows you to harvest a larger crop. HH allows the plant to survive better in unsuitable conditions. Perfect for farms in winter or in the desert. There is only one bad gene in the game, this is W. It increases fluid intake by 1 milliliter per minute. Red X is in theory also a negative gene, it just takes up space and does not give anything. Thus, the plant in the screenshot is the most standard in all respects. No genes have any effect on its growth. But here we have the first gene does nothing, the second slightly improves the survival of the plant in poor conditions. As we can see, he likes the temperature much more now than the first one, even though he is in the same bed. It also grows a little faster thanks to the G gene, but consumes as much as 2 milliliters more water. 2 milliliters per minute is not so much. However, if you have 16 beds on each floor, then you will have to pour 17 liters of water into them per hour more. When installing a plant, its genotype is generated absolutely randomly. Thus, 6 negative genes or 6 positive ones can fall out at once. Maybe 6 are the same, or maybe 3 are the same and 3 are different, as you like. If the genotype of the plant is successful, it can be cloned for further breeding or crossing. To do this, we wait for the stage when the plant can be picked up. The stage of this is different in plants. The earliest stage of cannabis is the sapling stage. Pinch E and click clone. The number of clones depends on the number of UAI genes. There can be from 2 to 5 clones. The genotype of the clone is displayed in the inventory when hovering, as well as when opening detailed information. When cloning a plant with 6X genes, there is a possibility that one of the 2 clones sometimes receives a random genotype. This happens if you rasticate them, because for some reason they are not marked with 6Xs in the inventory. Thus, it is almost impossible to cultivate plants without GMOs in the game. The plastic world has one. Among the 5 genes, most of us will be interested in only 2, J and vine, that is, the growth rate and the amount of harvest. Depending on how many first and second genes we have in the genotype, the efficiency of the farm changes. The most effective genotype for cannabis is 3G genes and 3Y genes, for simplicity of designation 3G 3Y. The order of the genes in the chain does not matter, only the number. If you use fertilizers in the farm, then it may also make sense to use 2G 4Y genes. They produce more clones, which means they are much faster to produce, and they also grow longer, giving more harvest at a time. This allows you to save time on harvesting and planting new fruits. Okay, the essence of sleep. Let's say we need a sprout with the genotype 3G3Y. How do we get it? To begin with, we just plant all our seedlings in the beds and look at what we have fallen out. The chance that you will immediately be able to knock out the right sprout is insanely small, however, this also happens. If it didn't fall out, then let's at least get a similar one to what we need. For 50 seeds, I managed to knock out the genotype 2G3Y1X. It's almost perfect. We are separated from the ideal only by the last gene, which we need to replace with G. First you will need to wait until he enters the sapling phase and make a clone. While our grass is growing, let's figure out how to cross them. The principle here is the same for all plants. As soon as the seedling reaches the crossbred stage, it takes over the strongest genes from its neighbors. In this case, the bushes directly located nearby are considered to be neighbors. This also works diagonally, so that 4 different plants can be grown at the corners of the bed without fear of crossing. Next, we need to figure out how genes affect each other. The first thing we need to know is that a gene in the first slot can only affect another agent in the first slot. Genes from different slots do not affect each other in any way. Thus, in order for us to change this last gene, we need to select plants with the desired last gene. In this case, we want X to be replaced by G, so let's find a couple of plants with G at the end. I have a lot of different plants in my trunk, so I've already picked up some good options. Here we have the first, there is the second. Now let's write out all our genes in a column for clarity. Let's start with our main plant. Here are his genes, G, Y, 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 X. Below we write out the genes of our other 2 plants. Now we should pay attention to the red genes. I'm not a biology teacher, so I won't talk about dominant genes. Let's just agree that when crossing, the red gene will have 100 power, and the green one will have only 60. Now we just need to count in a column which gene is the strongest. There are 2 Gs in the first column, so they win. They have 120 power. For 2. Then we have 2 games, so we take them. In third place, everyone has the same gene, we leave everything as it is. With the fourth, we have a difficult situation. The fact is that the 3 positive genes in the plant do not interact with each other at all. When crossing all plants in this case, the gene on this slot remains the original one. In the 5th slot, the Y clearly wins, and in the 6th you will have to count a little. As we remember, the red gene has 100 powers, the green ones have 60. We add 2 greens, getting 120. 120 is more than 100, so Gen G will win. It turns out exactly what we wanted, 3G, 3Y, but this is still only in Photoshop. As for the game, first, we put our original clone with X in the middle. Now we need to wait until he goes into the sapling stage. It will take a little more than 10 minutes. When the sapling stage is already in full swing, we plant our other 2 clones next door and wait another 5 minutes until the crossing stage begins, crossbred. As we can see, the results of the crossing were calculated correctly by us. We wait for the completion of the crossing stage and collect clones. Now we can plant our clones and clone them further until we have about enough time to plant 2 or 3 farms. It won't take as much time as it seems. However, This is not even a tenth of what you need to know about crossing in order to use it normally. First, let's look at a few more situations. Firstly, you can cross not only 3 plants, but also more, namely up to 9 pieces. The principle is observed here: the reds have 100 forces, the greens have 60. But what if, for example, we try to cross 2 pairs of positive genes? It's pretty simple here, the chance is just to share equally. And that is, we will have either one gene or another, 50-50. It is also worth remembering that the forces are formed exclusively by the same genes. So, for example, in the case of crossing the genes of G, Y, X, the greens will not win, because they each have 60 forces. She won't stay, because the genes themselves are different. Or here, for example, a combination of JGXW. There are as many reds here as there are greens. It turns out that they have more strength, but the greens will win, because their strength is stacked and it turns out 120, and the reds have 100 each. Also, 3 green genes will not be able to defeat 2 red ones, because their total strength will be less. Out of all this comes another way of crossing. It's called 50-50. It is the simplest and most effective. To begin with, we need a completely positive sprout. Here, for example, take this. Here we have all good genes, but we absolutely do not need 2. Let's try to replace at least one of them with agent G. For convenience, we draw the table again. The sprout that we have, we will use twice. It turns out that in order to change our useless H genes, we need to find 2 different sprouts with the desired G genes. As for the remaining places, the only thing to do is to make sure that there are no duplicates among them. And that is, we need G to be in the first place of 2 seedlings, and the other places should not be repeated in any way. It is much easier to find such seedlings than those needed in the previous method. Let's try to keep within 50 seeds. First, let's land everything and pay attention to those where G is in the first place. In total, I got 6 such seedlings. Now let's find 2 of these, in which no gene except the first one repeats. In my case, such a pair was found. These are the 6th and 4th pointers. Now let's water them so that the poor devils don't wither, and wait for cloning. Now we are preparing everything for crossing. We need 1 regular seed in the center. It does not need to be selected in any way, we just plant any seed, no matter what genes it will have, and wait. It is she who will become the progenitor of the future seedling. We will also need 2 almost perfect seedlings, the genes in which we take as a basis. Well, those 2 seedlings that we just watered. Since the operation is 50%, then make sure that each of the seedlings has a copy. And in general, clone all seedlings before each crossing, in case of a random error. At this moment, some strange problem was revealed. For some reason unknown to me, this particular set of genes did not work. At first I thought that I was just unlucky, but after a couple of dozen attempts it became clear that these 2 seedlings would not be able to replace H with G. However, I picked up seedlings for the change of H to Y on exactly the same principle, and everything worked just fine. And no, it's not about the letters at all, because in the same way I repeated this method on G, everything worked the first time. Apparently the system is just a little bit dirty. So yes, if the 50-50 method does not work for you in the right way, just try to change additional seedlings. Fortunately, it is very simple to do this, especially if you immediately guess to change them, and not to hammer the same thing for a day like me. I understand that the topic of genetics is very brain-blowing. I myself am already here specifically on nerves, but I am ready to please. That's the end of the genes. The principle explained, 2 popular ways explained. It's time to know the honor. But the vetoes does not end there at all. In order to combine all this knowledge about farming, you need to learn how to build an effective farm. The location is obvious. Huge farms need to be built on water. The simplest option is lakes and rivers, because we won't have to explain the water in this case. Construction begins from the underwater floor. This is where we put the pumps. Pumps need exactly as many floors as planned. In our case, there will be 6 of them. All 6 pumps are connected to other pumps, this time circulation pumps. From them, the water will go directly to the sprinklers, so we'll come back to this a little later. In the meantime, let's build a foundation. I will not focus on the placement of aggregates and service corridors. We are talking exclusively about the principle of placement and processing of beds. You can do the rest as you want. There are 16 beds on each floor, 4 by 4 square. On each floor there are 4 sprinklers, and on even floors there are also 16 lamps. On the top floor it is worth making a helipad, because we will have to move a lot around the map, to the city of bandits and back. You can also do this by car, but a copter is the easiest option at first. We also put solar panels on the roof. There are 13 of them in total, 7 power 1 battery, and 6 another. The first one is located on the top floor and all the lights are connected from it. The connection here is the simplest. We lead the cable to the nearest lamp from the battery, from it to the next one, from the next one to the third one, and so on to the end. The remaining 6 solar panels power another battery located on the ground floor. And of course, to connect the solar panels, we need combined harvesters, in total 11 pieces. From the lower battery, we divert 33 energies into our pumps at once. Each pump consumes 5 energy, and the other 3 go to the separation of electricity. To do this, we have another branch for 16 and 2 splitters here. Back to the first branch. There is another cable coming from it, which feeds the circulation pumps here in exactly the same way as with the pumps below. This pump only has 2 units of energy. You can also connect the same automatic watering system here, if you need it. It may seem surprising, but yes, this is where all the difficulties in building a farm end. All we have to do is connect the irrigation pipes from the circulation pumps. Now we can manage irrigation on each floor separately. Now I need to say a few words about the materials of the walls. They can be built either from stone windows with glass and shutters, or from stone walls mixed with metal. For the price, the option with windows is a little cheaper. It is also convenient because you can get out of the window at any time by removing it. And at night, you can open the shutters, showing the raider that the glades are planted, and there is no sense in raiding the farm. But I would still not advise leaving all these windows, because they will have to be crafted for a very long time. As for me, the ideal option is several windows on each floor, and the rest is built up with walls, both metal and stone. Subsequently, all this good can be completely improved metal. According to the work of the farm, the principle is as follows. At first, it is worth limiting yourself to 2 floors, since the entire farm will require about 70,000 stone. Then we collect random seedlings and plant everything that is on the ground floor. While they are growing, we water all the beds manually. The light will have to be carried out immediately. Next, we output the most convenient genotype for you, whether it's 3G3Y or 2G4Y, or maybe even 2Hey4Y, in the event that you built in the winter. The next step is to clone as many of these plants as possible until we manage to plant all 2 floors of the farm. We clone them a couple more times and plant them for sale. From the first sale, we buy resources and beds for the remaining floors and complete the farm. It is necessary to plant plants during the regular operation of the farm at the beginning of the day, when the temperature has already risen and there are no plants to fall yet. If seedlings are planted in the evening or too early in the morning, they may not give a full harvest when harvested. When exiting online, the farm should be empty, and ideally the raiders should be notified of this with a sign. There are a lot of people who want to infect a fully planted farm, but empty raid goes much less often. Now briefly about the trade. The simplest options are to get a particular resource. 13 MFCs for 75 scraps, purchase and recycling of solar panels and medium-sized batteries. 500 metal fragments, 5 MVK and 2 gears for 175 scrap. Purchase and recycling of a lift for transport. 50% chance of a chip for 75 scraps. Purchase and recycling of smart switches and smart alarms. 15 gunpowder and 13 metal for 8 scrap grenade F1. Here it is worth warning that processing them in large volumes will simply take an infinitely long time, but clearly many times faster than forming and melting sulfur. Tactical gloves are ideal for obtaining leather and threads. And in order to find out more of these crafts, relax.com website. To switch to the Russian version of the site, it is enough to add RU at the beginning of the link. Aren't you overworked? And I make these videos in a week, think about it, but nothing. We just have to deal with the berries, and this is much easier. You can find these berries in the forest, they come in 6 different colors. On the 24th of August, black berries are not used for making tea, so there is no point in collecting them or storing them. All the other berries are worth picking. At the beginning of the vape, to save space in the inventory, I advise you to eat all the collected berries at once, thereby getting more seeds. But this is in case you will grow them. If you do not plan to grow, then on the contrary, throw out the seeds, and collect the berries themselves. You can make teas from berries on the mixing table. These teas give temporary buffs. The current pathos and their time can be checked in the inventory. Be careful, buffs are reset after the character's death. Now let's talk about all the buffs in brief. Each tea comes in 3 tiers, simple, advanced and pure. The higher the shooting range, the stronger the effect. The easiest tea to understand is tea on the hill. It works like an ordinary large first aid kit, only HP restores not 100, but 30, 45 or 60, depending on the shooting range. The only thing is, before the hill with such tea, you will have to remove radiation and bleeding from yourself. In this regard, the first aid kit is clearly cooler. This is the only tea whose shooting gallery makes no sense to raise. If you have 4 teas of the first level, then changing them to 1 tea of the second is idiotic, and it is much easier to carry several Ts weaker than one stronger. Fortunately, they allow it. A T increase in the maximum amount of HP, on the contrary, is very much worth reducing to a clean one, since an increase of plus 20 HP justifies any costs. But it makes little sense to carry such T with you, but keeping it at home in case of a raid is a very reasonable solution. T for scrap extraction, it seems to me, does not justify itself at all, because it increases the loss of scrap exclusively from barrels. And this is about nothing. I drank advanced T for scrap, broke 30 barrels and recycled their contents. It turned out 124 scraps. Then I repeated the experiment without the buff, and I got 153 scraps. And all because most of the extracted scrap comes from processing, as well as from the boxes, which this time I did not loot at all. However, the effect of T does not apply to either of them. But T can be used for ore and for the extraction of wood. However, I would not advise making these Ts pure, because 4 Ts for 60% of production is not at all worse than 100%. Do not forget that you can be killed, and the T will evaporate along with the extracted ore. Well, the notorious T for protection from radiation. Here, the developers made a small catch, namely, they fucked up everything on pewter. All shooting galleries have the same description, which does not give any understanding of why T is needed. At the same time, they all have a completely different effect, but none of them works the right way. The only thing for which this T can be useful is to get the rays of the sight in the anti-raid, so that you don't have to sneak up on the roof, no more. From all that has been said, it becomes clear that we will need only red, blue and yellow berries. And there are a couple of problems with their breeding. The most important thing is the impossibility of cloning bushes with berries. Rather, it is possible, but only 100 minutes after landing. Another thing is that despite the impossibility of breeding ideal varieties artificially, they can still interbreed, which means they spoil each other's genes. To solve both problems at once, it will be necessary, firstly, instead of cloning, to simply devour the grown berries, thereby obtaining seeds for planting in large volumes. Of course, when the seeds are already enough, you cannot devour the berries, but cook with them. But they need to be planted so that they do not interbreed. Since we have 3 colors, it's enough just to plant one color in the corners, and the other 2 opposite each other. The central slot can be planted with any other plants. This is how we grow berries. Then we buy and study salt for mixing, put it on and trade in seagulls. As you can see, my pitch has become very dry and brief, which means that I'm tired and it's time to finish the video.